You're listening to The Hollow Hour. Every story you're about to hear was sent in by someone who lived through it. Tonight's theme: people who thought they were alone in their own homes and weren't. If you're listening to this at night in an empty house, you might want to check your locks before we start. Let's begin. The babysitter who wasn't alone. I used to babysit for the Whitfield family every other Friday night. 2 kids, Emma, who was 7, and her baby brother Theo, who was 8 months old. The house sat at the very edge of town, the kind of place where the porch light is the only thing between you and a quarter mile of dark trees. I'd been doing this for almost a year, so by that Friday in October, the routine was second nature. Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield were going out for their anniversary dinner in the city, probably back around midnight. Emma was excited because I let her stay up an extra half hour to finish a chapter of her book. And Theo went down easy, the way he always did. By 9, both kids were asleep. I settled on the couch with my phone and a bowl of cereal, half watching something with the volume low so I wouldn't wake the baby monitor. Around 9:40, my phone rang. No name, no caller ID, just a string of numbers. I almost didn't answer. But what if it was Mrs. Whitfield calling from a restaurant phone because her cell died? I picked up. Nothing. Just breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing. Like someone trying very hard to stay quiet. I said, "Hello?" Twice. And then the line went dead. I told myself it was a wrong number, a butt dial, some glitch. I put the phone face down on the coffee table and tried to go back to my show, but I kept glancing at the dark windows. 15 minutes later, a text came through from the same number. "Check on the kids." My stomach dropped. But I told myself this was just some prank. Maybe a friend of the Whitfields messing with the babysitter. Still, I went upstairs. Emma was curled up under her blanket. Fine. Theo was on his back in the crib, breathing steady, fine. I texted back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared. Then, I'm not talking about the kids upstairs. I'm talking about the ones in the basement. I actually laughed out loud, that nervous kind of laugh. Because what kids in the basement? The Whitfields only had 2 kids. I'd been in that basement before. It was just a laundry room and storage boxes. I typed back, "Lol, there's no kids in the basement, nice try," and put the phone down again. But I couldn't focus anymore. The house felt different. Bigger somehow, like I was suddenly aware of every room I couldn't see. I walked toward the kitchen where the basement door was, and that's when I noticed it was open. Not wide. Just a few inches with that thin slice of darkness behind it. I always closed that door. It was the thing with the Whitfields, because of the cold air that came up from down there. I remembered closing it earlier after grabbing a load of laundry. I stood in the kitchen for a long time just looking at that gap. Cold air drifted out, the same as always. What wasn't normal was the sound underneath it. A soft, dragging shuffle, like a foot sliding across concrete, somewhere down in the dark. I backed away and called Mrs. Whitfield. This is straight to voicemail. I called Mr. Whitfield. Same thing. My phone buzzed again. "Don't go down there. Get the kids and get out, now." That was the moment I stopped trying to make sense of it and just moved. I went upstairs, grabbed Theo out of his crib. He stirred but didn't wake, and woke Emma as gently and quickly as I could, telling her we were going to play a surprise nighttime game where we had to be super quiet. We got to the top of the stairs, and that's when I heard the front door. Not a knock. The actual door. The latch turning, the door swinging open and then clicking shut again. like someone had just walked out or in. I locked us in Emma's room, pushed her dresser in front of the door as quietly as I could with one arm full of baby, and called 911. I kept my voice down to almost nothing while I gave the address. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. When the police arrived, I heard them come in through the front, and I heard them go down into the basement almost immediately, like they already knew to look there. They found a man behind the water heater, in a gap between the foundation wall and a stack of old paneling that had been pulled loose and propped back into place. He'd been living down there on and off for weeks. He had a sleeping bag, food wrappers, and a notebook with the Whitfield's schedule written out, including which Fridays I babysat.
The phone the text came from was a prepaid burner found in his bag. The officer told me that whoever sent those texts probably wasn't trying to scare me. They were trying to warn me. But they never found out who that number belonged to. It was never used again. The thing that still gets me, even now, is something Mrs. Whitfield mentioned weeks later, almost as an afterthought. Emma had drawn a picture months before any of this. Crayon people, like kids do. And when her mom asked who they were, Emma said, very matter of fact, "Those are the kids that live in the basement." Mrs. Whitfield had laughed it off as imaginary friends. I never babysat for them again. Our next story comes from someone who just moved into a new apartment after a divorce and found out the wall behind her closet wasn't as solid as it looked. Story 2. Apartment 4B. After my divorce, I needed somewhere cheap and close to work, so I took a one-bedroom in an old brick building downtown. Apartment 4B, 4th floor, end of the hall. Built in the 1920s, the kind of place with creaky radiators and floors that slope just slightly toward the windows. The guy across the hall, in 4A, was an older man named Mr. Albright. 70s, maybe older. Thin, with thinning gray hair combed very precisely to one side. He'd lived there longer than anyone. The building super told me he'd been in that apartment since the building was converted from a hotel back in the 80s. He was polite, in a stiff sort of way. Always said good morning. Never made eye contact for more than a second. I didn't think much of him at first. About 3 weeks after I moved in, I started noticing small things. A lamp in my living room I was sure I'd left off was on when I got home. A book I'd left on my nightstand was on the kitchen counter. Nothing valuable was missing, so I told myself I was just disorganized. New place, new routines, you forget where you put things. Then there was the smell. Faint but distinct. Old cigarette smoke, the kind that clings to wool coats. I don't smoke, neither did my ex. I'd catch it sometimes walking into the bedroom, strongest near the closet, and then it would just fade, like it had never been there. One Saturday, I was rearranging the closet and noticed a loose panel at the back, behind where I hung my coats. It looked like part of the wall, painted the same off-white as everything else, but when I pushed on it, it shifted slightly. Behind it was a narrow gap, maybe 8 inches deep, running the length of the closet, and at the far end, a rectangular metal grate, the kind you'd see on an old laundry chute. I climbed in just far enough to look through the grate, and on the other side, I could see, faintly because there was a little light coming through, what looked like another closet. Coats hanging, a shoe rack, Mr. Albright's closet. I backed out of there so fast I hit my head on the door frame. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Old buildings have weird shared utility spaces. I didn't sleep well that night, and I started keeping my bedroom door closed, which I'd never done before. About a week later, I came home from a late shift, and the apartment felt wrong. The air felt used, like someone had been breathing it. My laptop, which I always left closed, was open, the screen still glowing with the login page. And on my dresser, my jewelry box, a little wooden one my grandmother gave me, was open, and a pair of earrings I almost never wore were missing. That's when I stopped explaining things away. The building super, when I told him everything, looked uncomfortable in a way that told me this wasn't the first time he'd heard something like this. He admitted the wall between 4A and 4B used to be a shared linen closet back when the building was a hotel, and that when they converted it, they'd sealed it on both sides, but apparently not well. He said he'd look into it, which I now know is landlord speak for nothing. So I bought a cheap motion-activated camera, the kind that connects to your phone, and pointed it at the closet door. Then I told a coworker I was staying with my sister, packed a bag, and went and stayed at a hotel for 2 nights. The footage from the second night is the part I still can't fully process. At 2:47 a.m., the closet door opened, the way you'd open a door if you didn't want it to creak. A man stepped out into my bedroom, Mr. Albright. He was wearing a robe, and he walked through my apartment like he'd done it 100 times, straight to my dresser, where he stood for almost 10 minutes, just looking through the drawers, occasionally holding something up to the light before setting it back down, sometimes in a different spot than it came from. Then he went into my closet, and came back out a minute later wearing one of my jackets. He stood in front of my full-length mirror, turning slowly side to side, looking at himself. Then he took it off, hung it back up exactly where it had been, and went back through the wall. I called the police the next morning and showed them the footage. When they searched 4A with his reluctant landlord present, they found a hidden space behind his own closet wall, maybe 4 feet by 6, that he'd apparently built out himself over decades. Inside were boxes and boxes of small items, jewelry, photographs, hair ties, a child's shoe, dozens of little things that clearly weren't his. Some of it dated back to the 80s based on the styles and the dust. He'd been doing this to tenants in 4B for over 30 years. I moved out within the month. I still check closets in every new place I live, every single time, before I unpack anything. This next one was sent in by someone who learned the hard way that the scariest thing about a long drive home isn't always the road. Story 3. The Man in My Backseat. I want to preface this by saying I've told this story to maybe 5 people in my life, and every single one of them said the same thing. Why didn't you just look in the back seat before you got in the car? And every time I have to explain, you don't. Nobody does. Not really. This was about 2 years ago. I'd driven about 90 minutes out to visit a friend who'd just moved to a small town near the coast, and I was driving back late, maybe 11 at night, on a stretch of highway that runs through a lot of nothing. Farmland, the occasional gas station, long gaps of total darkness between towns. About halfway home, my tank was getting low, so I pulled into one of those gas stations, the kind that's really just 2 pumps and a convenience store with flickering fluorescent lights. There was one other car there, parked off to the side near the air pump, engine off, no one inside that I could see. And there was a guy standing near the entrance to the store, not going in, not coming out, just standing there. Mid-30s, maybe, hoodie, hands in his pockets. I didn't think much of it. Gas stations at night attract weird vibes in general. I got out, started filling up, and he kind of watched me. Not staring exactly, but his head tracked me the way you'd track someone if you were trying to remember details about them. I went inside to pay, grabbed a drink, and when I came back out, he was gone. The other car was still there, still empty. I got back on the highway. About 10 minutes later, I started feeling like something in the car was off. Not a sound, more like a smell. Faint, like sweat and laundry detergent. The kind of smell that's there one second and gone the next when I try to focus on it. I told myself it was probably just my own clothes. I turned the radio up and kept driving. A few minutes after that, a truck came up behind me. One of those big lifted pickups with the extra bright LED headlights. And as it got closer, the light flooded my whole car, lighting up the interior way more than normal headlights would. In that half second of bright light, I saw it in my rearview mirror. A shape in my back seat. Low, like someone curled up against the door, trying to stay below the window line. The truck passed and the light dropped away, and the back seat went back to being just shadows. I sat there with my hands locked on the wheel, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. A jacket I'd thrown back there maybe, or my gym bag. But I knew. Somewhere underneath all the maybe it's nothing, I knew. Here's the thing. I didn't want to do anything that would tip him off, in case I was wrong. And I really didn't want to do anything that would tip him off in case I was right. So I picked up my phone and, in the most casual voice I could manage, called 911. "Hey! Oh my gosh, it's been forever," I said, the second it connected. The dispatcher, thank God, picked up on it immediately and just said, "Okay, I understand. Stay calm. Can you tell me your location?" I read off a road sign I'd just passed, still in my chatty voice, laughing a little at nothing. She told me there was a police station about 6 miles ahead on this same road and to drive there. Not home, not anywhere else, and to keep talking the whole way like everything was normal. So I did. I talked about nothing for 6 of the longest miles of my life. When I pulled into the police station lot, lit up like a stadium, there were already 2 cruisers waiting, lights off, parked at angles near where I'd stop. The second I put the car in park, an officer was at my door telling me to get out and walk toward him, slowly. Don't look back. I did. And behind me, I heard the back door of my own car open. They found him under a blanket I keep in my trunk. Except it wasn't in the trunk anymore. It was over him, on the floor behind the driver's seat, where he'd wedged himself down low enough that you really couldn't see him unless the light hit just right. He'd gotten in while I was inside paying for gas. The other car at the station, the empty one, that was his. He'd left it there on purpose. He had a folding knife in his jacket pocket. The officer told me, in that careful way they talk to you when they don't want to scare you more than you already are, that based on where he was positioned and what he was carrying, it didn't look like he was planning to do anything until I got home and got out of the car. Somewhere quiet, somewhere with no cameras and no gas station attendant 20 feet away. I don't stop at empty gas stations anymore, and I check my backseat every single time I get in the car, even if I just stepped away for 30 seconds. My friends think it's a quirk. I've stopped trying to explain it. Our 4th story is one a lot of people tell us they think about every time they hear someone knock on their door. 3 times. Exactly. Story 4. 3 knocks. I live alone in a small house at the end of a cul-de-sac. Quiet street, mostly retirees and a couple of families, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. Which is part of why what happened still doesn't feel real to me, even months later. It started on a Tuesday, around 11 p.m. I was in bed, not quite asleep, when I heard 3 knocks at the front door. Not frantic. Slow, evenly spaced, almost polite. Knock, knock, knock. I wasn't expecting anyone, obviously, at that hour. I got up, looked through the peephole, and saw nothing. Just the dark porch, the little bit of light from the street lamp across the road. I checked the side window, too. Nobody. I figured it was probably kids messing around and went back to bed. About 25 minutes later, it happened again. 3 knocks. Same rhythm, same spacing. I have a doorbell camera, one of those Wi-Fi ones, so this time, instead of going to the door, I pulled up the app on my phone. The footage was nothing, empty porch. But the audio, the camera does pick up audio, had the knocks. Clear as anything. 3 knocks with nobody visible in frame when they happened. That's when I started feeling genuinely uneasy. I texted my friend Mara, told her what was going on, half joking, half not. She said something like, "Okay, that's actually creepy. Make sure everything's locked." Which, in hindsight, was good advice I should have taken a lot more seriously, a lot sooner. I checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I sat in the living room with the TV on for background noise, lights on, trying to talk myself down. An hour passed. Nothing. Then, around 1 a.m., I heard 3 knocks again. Except this time, they came from the back door, off the kitchen. Same spacing. Knock, knock, knock. I went cold. The back door faces the yard, which backs onto a strip of trees and then the next street over. Nobody would just be wandering back there at 1 a.m. I didn't go look this time. I stayed exactly where I was, on the couch, frozen, staring at the hallway that led to the kitchen. And then, and this is the part I still have trouble saying out loud, I heard 3 more knocks. But not from the back door. Not from the front door either. From the basement door. The basement door in my house is at the end of a short hallway off the kitchen, and it's not a door that gets knocked on because it doesn't lead anywhere. It's just stairs down to an unfinished basement with the water heater and some storage. There is no reason for anyone to be on the other side of that door, knocking, ever. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, deliberate, exactly like the others. I think something in my brain just shut off the part that wanted to investigate because I didn't move toward any of it. I went straight to my bathroom, which has a lock, locked the door, sat on the floor with my back against the bathtub, and called 911 in a whisper. The dispatcher kept me on the line. She asked if I'd heard any movement, any other sounds. I told her about the 3 knocks, all 3 locations, and she went quiet for just a second before her voice changed. Got more careful, more direct. She asked if I had a way to barricade the bathroom door further and told me police were on the way and to stay on the line no matter what I heard. For the next 10 minutes, I heard nothing. No more knocks, just my own breathing, way too loud in that little bathroom. When the police arrived, and I only know this part because of what they told me afterward, they found a man at the back of the house near the tree line who took off running the second their lights hit the yard. They caught him about a quarter mile away.
And in my basement, behind a stack of moving boxes I hadn't touched since I bought the house 2 years ago, they found a sleeping bag, some food wrappers, and a man who'd apparently been living down there for at least several days. Here's what the officers explained to me as gently as they could. The man outside and the man in my basement knew each other. The knocking was a signal. 3 knocks from outside meant, "Is it clear?" 3 knocks back from inside would have meant, "Yes, come in." some kind of code they'd worked out. The basement guy hadn't answered the first 2 rounds because I was still up and moving around. The third time, when I'd gone quiet in the bathroom and they thought I might be asleep, that's when the basement guy finally knocked back. Except I hadn't gone to bed. I was sitting 20 feet away on the phone with 911. They never figured out exactly how the man got into my basement in the first place. There's a window down there that doesn't lock properly, something I'd been meaning to fix for, embarrassingly, about a year. He'd apparently been getting in and out through it, timing it around when I was at work. I had that window replaced within the week. I also had a deadbolt put on the basement door, which I know doesn't make a lot of logical sense. It's not like a deadbolt would have stopped any of this. But it's the only thing that's let me sleep in that house since. Our final story tonight is the one our community talks about the most. About a man who didn't just know where someone lived. He knew exactly when they'd be gone. Story 5. He knew my schedule. I work night shifts at a hospital. 3 or 4 overnight shifts a week, usually 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I live alone in a small rental house I'd had for about a year and a half when this happened. And for most of that time, everything was completely normal. It started small, little things that individually meant nothing. I'd come home in the morning and find the thermostat set 2 degrees warmer than I'd left it. A throw pillow on the couch in a slightly different spot. Once, I was sure I'd left a load of laundry in the dryer overnight, and when I got home, it was folded. Not perfectly, but folded, and sitting on top of the machine. I genuinely thought I was losing it. I'd been doing night shifts for years. Sleep-deprived brain doing weird things to my memory felt plausible. I even joked about it with a coworker. I think I'm sleep-folding laundry. But then I noticed a pattern. These little things, the thermostat, the pillow, items moved. They only ever happened on nights I worked. Never on my nights off. Every single time. That's when I stopped joking about it. I have a cousin who's a bit of a tech guy, and I asked him, casually, what the cheapest option was for a hidden camera. Something that wouldn't look like a camera. He set me up with one disguised as a USB wall charger, the kind that plugs into an outlet and just looks like a phone charger, except it's got a tiny lens and records to a memory card. I plugged it into an outlet in my bedroom, angled toward the bed and the door, and went to work that night like normal. Nothing happened. Same the next night I worked. I started to feel a little silly. Maybe I really had just been losing track of small things, and the pattern was my brain finding patterns where there weren't any. On the third night, there was something. The footage is time-stamped, so I know exactly when it happens. 11:42 p.m., about 3 hours after I'd left for my shift. The bedroom door, which I always close out of habit, opens. Slowly, a man walks in. He wasn't sneaking. That's the part that stuck with me the most. He walked into my bedroom the way you'd walk into your own bedroom. Easy, unhurried, like he'd done it 100 times and had nowhere to be. He went straight to my dresser, opened the second drawer, my going out clothes drawer, not the everyday stuff, and stood there for a minute, looking through it before closing it again. Then he left the room. The camera doesn't cover the rest of the house, so I don't know everything he did, but based on what I found when I got home that morning, a glass in the sink I hadn't used, the TV remote in a different spot, the bathroom slightly damp like someone had showered,
He made himself completely at home. The camera caught him again at 6:51 a.m., 9 minutes before I'd normally start my drive home. He came back into the bedroom, made the bed, badly. One corner was always slightly off after that, which in hindsight I'd noticed for weeks and just blamed on my own sloppy bed making. And then, right before he left the frame for the last time, he stopped. He turned and he looked directly at the outlet, at the camera. For almost 5 full seconds, he just stood there, looking right into the lens, completely still. Then he left, and the bedroom door closed behind him. I want to be clear about how I felt watching that. It wasn't just fear. It was this specific, sick feeling of, he knew. Maybe not that exact camera, in that exact outlet, but he knew to check. Like checking for cameras was just part of his routine. The same way checking your mirrors is part of driving. Like he'd done this in other houses before and gotten good at it. I called the police that morning instead of going to sleep. They came out, took the footage, and asked a lot of questions. Had I ever had a roommate? Had the house ever changed hands? Had I given a spare key to anyone? An ex, a contractor, a dog walker? The honest answer to almost all of those was, I don't know. The house had been a rental for years before I moved in, and I had no idea how many people had had access to a key over that time, or whether any of those keys had ever been returned. They changed my locks that same day, every exterior door, plus the one window that didn't lock properly. An officer told me, in that flat professional tone they use when they're trying not to alarm you further, that this kind of thing, someone using an old key to access a home specifically when the resident is reliably gone for predictable stretches, happens more often than people think, especially with rental properties that have had a lot of turnover and a landlord who doesn't bother re-keying between tenants. They never found him. I gave a description based on the footage. Average height and build, dark clothes, face mostly turned away from the camera in every frame except that last one. And even then, the angle and lighting meant his features were never clear enough for anything useful. I moved out 2 months later. I told my landlord why, and he just kind of nodded, like it wasn't the first time he'd heard something like that about that house. I still have the footage saved. I've watched that last clip, him turning to look at the camera, more times than I probably should have. Every time, I notice something new. The way his shoulders are relaxed. The way he doesn't flinch or react, doesn't seem surprised or caught. Just looks, like he's confirming something he already suspected, and then moves on with his morning like it's nothing. Like he's done this before. And like, somewhere else, he's probably doing it again. That's all for tonight's Hollow Hour. If these stories made you want to double-check your locks, your closets, or your back seat, good. That's exactly the point. If you made it this far, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we bring you a new collection of true horror stories, all narrated, all 1 hour, perfect for falling asleep to if you're brave enough. And if something like this has ever happened to you, we want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments or use the submission link in the description. We read every single one. Until next time, lock your doors. Check your back seat. Good night.